Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Carrie Burke, your moderator for today's webinar, ThreadFix 2.5. You may send in questions at any time during the presentation via the Q&A chat feature. We will collect these and address them at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce Dan Cornell, a globally recognized application security expert who holds over 15 years of experience architecting, developing, and securing web-based software systems. As Chief Technology Officer and Principal at Denim Group, he leads the technology team to help Fortune 500 companies and government organizations integrate security throughout the development process. Presenting alongside Dan, we have Kyle Pippin. Kyle has over 15 years of experience successfully building and delivering enterprise-level software products and projects for customers in need of system application, and web application solutions for their business. As product manager of ThreadFix, Kyle is involved in all aspects of product planning, development, and presentation. He is responsible for ensuring ThreadFix meets or exceeds customer needs and expectations by working directly with clients, project management, and technical leads to facilitate the greatest possible value to customers.
Thanks, Carrie. How are you doing today, Kyle?
Fantastic, thank you.
Are you as excited about ThreadFix 2.5 as I am?
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. Well, great. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. We're really excited about the work that's gone into the ThreadFix 2.5 development series, and we're excited about some of the things that are coming next. Happy to have you all here with us to talk about this today. And, yeah, I guess we'll just jump right in. From an agenda standpoint, I'll talk a little bit about what we've seen, some trends we've seen in the industry, both from Denim Group's consulting practice as well as the ThreadFix product team's experience working with organizations rolling out ThreadFix. And we'll talk about some of the trends that we've seen there and how we're working with ThreadFix, trying to improve the ThreadFix platform to really facilitate organizations taking advantage of these trends. We'll talk a little bit about ThreadFix's background. I think a lot of the people that are here today have experience with ThreadFix, but for folks who may be new to ThreadFix, we'll talk a little bit about, in general, the problem that ThreadFix solves and how it solves it. And then we'll talk about what we've done in the ThreadFix 2.5 release. And again, we'll talk more about this later, but we've seen through some of the really cool implementations of ThreadFix, some of the really exciting stuff that people have done, we've tried to take a lot of the things that they've done, often using custom code, custom scripting, and we've tried to make that a lot easier for organizations to do so that they can roll ThreadFix and application security testing out across a greater part of their portfolio with less effort. So that's really what we've been focused on with this 2.5 release. We'll also talk a little bit about, in addition to the things that we have here today, what we'll be seeing coming in the next month or two as the ThreadFix 2.5 series progresses. Again, if you guys have questions, please use the Q&A feature, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end, or we'll certainly have some time at the end to address them. Hopefully everybody can stick around for them. So, DevOps is coming. That's a trend that we've seen for a long time, and it's something that's coming whether or not security teams want it. Organizations are deriving just too much value from breaking down the barriers between the development and the operations teams. DevOps lets organizations innovate faster and provide value to customers and stakeholders. And what this means is that security teams need to adapt, and some will adapt and will be able to continue to act as trusted advisors. Others are going to resist this transition, and that will very much be to their detriment. That's going to lead to them being marginalized. But smart security teams are going to look to use this transition to DevOps to their advantage. You can either fight the prevailing winds, try to push the rock up the hill. You can complain about DevOps, try to install some coarse-grained controls, or you can take advantage, understanding this is where the organization is heading to, and by recognizing this, take advantage of this transition. What you really need to do to make security relevant in a DevOps world, or in the transition to DevOps, you've got to move security earlier. You've got to move it to the left, and you've got to get buy-in. So if the development and operations team want to move fast, that means as an application security team, you have to move fast too. But if you can keep up, and if you can act as a resource to these DevOps teams, then that gets you as an application security representative, as a security representative, it gets you a seat at the table. That lets you act as a trusted advisor, and it gives you an opportunity to embed what you want in the processes and in the tool sets that these DevOps teams are rolling out. A benefit of this is this gives you better security insight into the state of the applications that your organization is deploying. It gives you better security insight, and you get that insight earlier and more often. Annual code reviews just don't cut it anymore, and a quarterly application pen test report is going to be worthless by the time somebody gets around to emailing it out and printing it. Right? But if you can successfully integrate application security testing into DevOps, this can give you so much more. So what do most application security teams want? They want to reduce risk exposure based on the applications that an organization is fielding. They want the dev teams to introduce fewer vulnerabilities. They want them to find vulnerabilities early, preferably before they've been released into production, and they want them to fix vulnerabilities quickly. And by doing this, reduce the exposure the organization has based on the applications they're deploying. What do DevOps teams want? DevOps teams need this to be easier. There's a story I tell, and it really, I think, illustrates the divide between traditional security teams and where security teams need to be moving. And I was giving a talk at B-Sides Austin a number of years ago talking about mobile security, and there was an old curmudgeon, security curmudgeon, a genuine security curmudgeon in the audience, and he, listened to what I said, and he said, well, if these developers would just stop writing such crappy code, all of our jobs would be easier. And I said, sir, you must be exceptionally popular with the dev teams in your organizations, right? I bet they can't wait to see you walking around the cubicles. And I think for that curmudgeon, he had a perception that developers didn't care about security. But that hasn't been my experience. I don't think that's the case. Contrary to what most curmudgeons believe, developers do care about security, but they also care about features that got promised by a hotshot VP to an important customer. They also care about performance issues degrading application responsiveness. They also care about non-security related bugs impacting the user experience. So the DevOps teams want, and really the DevOps teams need for security to be easier than it has been up until now. So how do you make this a reality? How do you make this work for everyone? Security needs to evolve to focus on what they want that is really crucial. And security needs to meet the DevOps teams on their turf. They need to understand how their processes work, understand the tools they're using. Because if the application security team can do that, then they can take advantage of all the investments that are being made building up these processes and these development tools. And you can take advantage of the continuous integration pipelines that DevOps teams are using to build and test software. Take advantage of the defect tracking systems they're using to track their workload. You can take advantage of the tempo of meetings they have to drive their efforts forward. Security can't be something other that happens on top of or parallel to these things. It has to be integrated. But to do that, security needs to change the way that they do things in a lot of cases. So these DevOps teams are creating pipelines for continuous integration and continuous delivery. This means they can rapidly consolidate all the recent changes to their software, produce a new build, and then determine if that build is fit for production. If you think of it as a pipeline, you put a build in one end, the pipelines do unit tests, functional tests, regressions tests, performance tests, and they want to find out if the software is ready to deploy. So why not include security tests into these pipelines? So let's look at what a security testing policy might look like for a DevOps pipeline. First, we're going to want to do some testing. These are going to help us determine the current security state of the software build. Some of these tests might be done synchronously, where we wait for the results. But understanding how a lot of security testing tools work, understanding how long a lot of security testing tools take to run, some of these tests may need to be done asynchronously. We're not going to be able to wait for them to finish before we move on. Then we're going to make a decision. Is this software build good enough from a security standpoint to be considered for delivery and possible deployment? Finally, we need to report back to the development team what we found. When you look at application security testing for DevOps, there are trade-offs. You want to get fewer false positives because you can't be breaking builds based on vulnerabilities that aren't there. So you may need to tune the rules that you're running to only focus on high confidence rules. Similarly, you may only be able to test portions of the applications, identifying what are the parts that are new or that have changed since the last time we did security testing. Let's limit our scope to those to make testing run faster. This may mean that we get more false negatives or situations where testing misses vulnerabilities. And that's all right. Application security testing in a CI/CD pipeline isn't meant as a replacement for all the rest of your application security program. You still have to do deep scanning, manual reviews, threat modeling, and so on. But what we're trying to do here is to find serious issues closer to the time that they were introduced so that developers can fix them more quickly. So how do we make a decision about whether or not to pass a build? Coming at this from a security standpoint, you may think a great policy would be no critical or high vulnerabilities identified in the application. And that would be great. But what if this application in question has been in development for some time and prior testing has already identified 100 cross-site scripting vulnerabilities? Do you really think that the development team or the business unit they're working for is going to let you break that build until all those get fixed in a month or so? Instead, what you may want to focus on for a decision-making criteria is this build can't introduce any new critical or high vulnerabilities. From a security standpoint, that's not as satisfying as saying none, but politically, that's probably a lot more acceptable in your organization. And so if security teams can be flexible, what they can find is a way to always make incremental improvements in the security of the software. From a reporting standpoint, we need to find out how to communicate anything that we've identified to developers. And I've been saying this for years. This is a big hint. Developers don't speak PDF. They also don't speak Excel. Developers are using their defect tracking change management systems to manage workloads. And if you want them to care about security vulnerabilities, they needed to be presented to the developers in the tools they're already using. Remember what we talked about before. We want to take advantage of all the infrastructure that these DevOps teams are putting in place. And in doing that, when we get new results, we can group vulnerabilities by type, by severity, or whatever makes sense for this development team that's going to make it easiest for them to consume those results. Now we'll turn things over to Kyle Pippin, and he can provide a little bit of a background on ThreadFix and the ThreadFix platform and how organizations use that to manage their application security programs. Take it away, Kyle.
Terrific. Thank you, Dan. As Dan mentioned, ThreadFix's core value is in enabling the security teams to do what they need to do, saving them time in the areas where they really aren't providing the value given the amount of time necessary. And we try and do that by obfuscating away those tasks that can be automated. He touched on some of the ways that we enable your security teams to do that, but the three primary areas are in integrating with a host of different scanning tools, over 30 different scanners of different technology types, whether it's interactive scanning, dynamic scanning, static scanning. We bring in all those results and give you a single view of what your portfolio's current risk appears to be. The second area is in communicating those. Once it's distilled down, deduplicated, and merged across your different scanning technologies, we allow you to open issues to defect trackers within your development team's workflow. So developers are now getting the issues that they need to work in the tools that they're already using, rather than looking at the PDFs or the Excel spreadsheets that they had historically been receiving. This enables them to more quickly work the issues and also ensures that they are incorporating them into their regular sprints. It also enables you as a security organization to identify what's getting remediated and when, because ThreadFix will keep up-to-date statuses of all of the issues you created in their defect trackers. So you can identify when something has been remediated from the development team, so they believe they've remediated, give you an indication that it is time to retest that, run another scan to validate, give you quick feedback on whether or not that has in fact been resolved, or if there's still an issue that needs to be communicated back to the development teams. The third area that we endeavor to save the security team time is in reporting all of this to management. So once the data is in a central location for all the disparate scanning technologies that you utilize, once you've moved it over to the development teams to work within their tools and they have fixed it and you have validated it, we provide you a very simple and easy way to slice and dice that data up, to report it to your superiors, to report it to other teams within your organization, to identify where your areas of improvement are occurring and where the areas of improvement need to focus on in the future within your organization's security practice. So ThreadFix has always been about saving the security team's time and in the ways that they can really spend their efforts on value-add activities and take them away from those repetitive actions that tend to occupy their weeks. And this fits in very tightly with what the 2.5 automation that we're building in will enable you to continue to do in getting even more insight into your security posture earlier in the development process where it's cheaper, quicker, and easier to fix it. So as an entire package, ThreadFix's goal with identifying your risk and focusing your remediation efforts and allowing you to report on all of that continues with our CI policies.
And let's take a look at how that works in action. So with ThreadFix, what it lets us do is it lets us first create a consolidated view of all the applications in our portfolio and the vulnerabilities that you get from all of this testing. Because you have this all in a centralized place, it lets you prioritize application risk decisions based on this data. And finally, you get to translate these vulnerabilities to developers in the tools that they're already using. Now, if we look at an overview, from a process flow standpoint, from an architecture standpoint, on the left side of this equation, we see testing. Static application security testing, dynamic application security testing, interactive application security testing, all this automation of testing. But also the other things that you have going on, manual testing, third-party reviews, threat modeling, and analysis of these vulnerabilities. ThreadFix ingests all this data, cleans it up, and gives you this unified view. So on the right side of the equation, you can see reporting and analytics. So you can make good data-backed decisions for your application security program. Finally, you can put this vulnerability data into the hands of the developers and the tools they're already using, like defect trackers, IDEs. And finally, by having all of your application security program data in a central place, that lets you communicate it up to risk management teams in the GRC systems that they may be using. And so in doing this, that gets application security a seat at the broader risk management table. Helps make your program for application security risk management an integrated part of the organization's overall risk management framework. Just to kind of look through what this flow looks like.
Yep. So here you can create a consolidated view of your app vulnerabilities. And you're seeing here your portfolio. So organized by teams within ThreadFix, you've got a series of applications that you create, and you can get an overview per team of what your current application vulnerability looks like based on the severity of those vulnerabilities. As this transitions through time, the vulnerability consolidation report that we provide you lets you look on a per vulnerability basis what the specific issues identified by the scanning tools that you are using were, while still obfuscating away in the default views what is really just the high-level vulnerability that you need to focus on as a development team. So allowing you to prioritize the risk decisions based on the data that we are providing you within ThreadFix gives you the opportunity to really spend the few hours you have each week to focus on remediating issues on those that are truly the highest impact within your organization. So the filtering views that we provide within ThreadFix for the vulnerabilities that are currently exposed allow you to quickly get to the specifics that you need to focus on right then, basing it on severity, or if you need to base it on a series of tags that you've put within your system so that you can look just at those vulnerabilities that are, say, public-facing or PCI compliance concerning. You can perform that filtering within ThreadFix to get the specific view that you need to make your decisions. Additional capabilities within ThreadFix are the shared vulnerability detection and our hotspot detection capabilities. So if you use static analysis tools within ThreadFix, we have all the information that we need to identify where you may have introduced vulnerabilities in source code that's shared among various teams and applications within your organization. Denim Group is a software security consultancy. It many times come across end users that we had identified vulnerable code. We reported it to the development team that was responsible for that application, and they said, hey, this wasn't actually our code. You have to talk to this other team. We just got it from an internal utilities team that built stuff that we use, but this other group over there uses the same code, and that group over there uses the same code. But we discovered that there was a potential to identify issues that could, with one fix, potentially remediate issues that exist in multiple applications. And so with our hotspot detection and shared vulnerabilities detection, we can go through that static analysis information that's provided across multiple applications and determine where overlap exists and subsequently where you have a high probability of a shared component that has a vulnerability, giving you the ability to fix something in one spot and resolve issues in multiple spots. The reporting and metrics inherent within ThreadFix give you lots of different ways to look at the information that you've accumulated. The various snapshot and trending reports give you quick insights into what the sorts of tools that you're using are providing in terms of value, which scanners are identifying the critical vulnerabilities you care about the most, how many of them have false positives that you're spending a lot of time trying to weed through, or worse yet, your developers are weeding through and eroding the confidence that they have in the results that you're providing them. All of this can lead to more informed purchase decisions in the future, or better enable you to roll out additional testing using those tools that seem to be most effective within your organization, as well as allowing you to view for particular time frames how you are improving your current posture within your applications. So translating this into the tools that developers are already using, ThreadFix, as we had mentioned, allows you to, for a number of different defect trackers, Jira, Bugzilla, HPALM, IBM, ClearQuest, a number of others, we will allow you to push those issues over to those defect trackers, allowing you to also customize what information you're providing those developers based on the tools that you're using, so that they get truly the core bits of information they need to perform the fix that is required, and then allow you to quickly validate those fixes as part of your workflow by reporting on its status over time. The defect tracker integration, once you've created those issues within ThreadFix, will provide tagging on those vulnerabilities, so you can see that an issue exists, you can see where it is, you can even click on that tag and it will open up the defect that you created in the defect tracker you created it in, so you can view any activity that's been taking place on that end in terms of developer comments, questions. The list of defect trackers that we support, as I mentioned, is fairly extensive and expanding all the time. We are actually even rolling out in the next, I would say, month and a half, 6 weeks, a Rally integration as well. So the defect tracker integrations will continue to grow. All right, so with that, the 2.5 release, I'll hand it back to Dan.
Thanks, Kyle. So really, the thing, again, what we talked about before, this transition to DevOps and the opportunity or the challenge for security to either make themselves relevant or risk being marginalized, along with that broader trend that we saw mainly through the Denim Group consulting practice, we also, in working with ThreadFix, saw a parallel trend. And what we saw is a number of organizations doing really cool stuff with their ThreadFix rollouts. But a characteristic of all of those rollouts was that where they were doing these really cool things, these very cool orchestrations, is the app security teams in those organizations had, members of the app security team had very strong development backgrounds from a prior life, and the management in those organizations had allocated a lot of time for those organizations to do a lot of tool smithing around their ThreadFix platform rollout. And again, that's great, and we saw some incredibly innovative things come out of that. And what we've tried to do with the 2.5 release is take the coolest things that we've seen in these implementations and to make that available to folks rolling out ThreadFix, but to make it available to them more from a configuration standpoint, rather than a custom coding standpoint. So we want to make those capabilities available to more organizations where they might not have, the app security team might not have as strong of a development background, where where management may not have allocated as much time for custom coding. And also for all organizations, we want to give them the ability to roll out those types of capabilities much more quickly so that they can cover a greater portion of their application portfolio with this type of DevOps app security testing. And one of the things I noticed giving a talk a couple years ago at a DevOps conference, I was talking with an organization about their ThreadFix rollout, and we brought up one of the slides that showed their architecture. And every ThreadFix implementation has a similar architecture where there's a bunch of stuff going on the left for testing, there's ThreadFix in the middle, and there's stuff on the right where there's reporting or other handling. And when this slide came up, everybody in the audience took out their phones and took a picture. And I said, okay, well, wow, that really resonates with organizations, is how do we get all of these inputs going on, all of these data sources in our organization about application vulnerability data, how do we get those controlled? And so what we've worked on with 2.5 is to give you the ability to incorporate this application security testing into your CI/CD pipeline. So we'll look here at the process of configuring testing policies in ThreadFix, as well as looking at how that executes in action. And so this goes back to what we talked about before. If you're going to have a testing policy, again, you're going to do some testing, some of it synchronous, some of it asynchronous. You're going to make some sort of a decision about whether or not to pass or fail to build. And then you need to do reporting to communicate what you found to the development teams. And again, the slides here will be posted shortly. Pull those down. I've got links to a blog post talking about this in more detail, as well as the talk that I gave at RSAC TV this year. Also, again, talking more about philosophically how we look at incorporating application security testing into a CI/CD pipeline. And again, what we've done with the 2.5 release is try to take that philosophy and make it easy for organizations to roll out that type of testing. So what we look is when we set up an application for a certain policy, we're going to want to do some sort of testing, right? To say, hey, for a given build, we want to run this test, this test, this test. Those three we're going to wait for. We're going to run this test. It's going to run too long. We're not going to wait for that. And so here's an example of setting up check marks. Check marks is really interesting from an app security testing in a CI/CD pipeline standpoint because of the differential scanning capabilities that they've got. And so that's one of the pass-throughs that we have in the testing capability that we've extended is you can say, hey, I want to run check marks, I want to run a differential scan because I hope that's going to run fast enough for that to fit inside of my testing window to be able to very quickly report back to developers. Similarly, you can configure testing with the dynamic testing tools via ThreadFix's scan agents. So in doing that, again, here we're saying I want to run a differential checkmark scan, and we're going to wait for it. I want to run a ZAP scan against this given application. And those are the tests that I want to run every time for a given Jenkins job. And again, in the configuration we've got here, we've decided that we want to wait for both of those. But you could also kick off more extensive scanning and say, I don't want to wait for that before making a decision. Then we want to configure the decisions that we're going to make. And as we talked about before, a policy may be something very strict, no criticals, no highs, right? That would be fantastic and may be appropriate for certain applications where you have the vulnerability count down to an acceptable level. But we also give you the ability to set up policies such as no new critical or highs. That makes sure that you acknowledge, hey, the development team has identified vulnerabilities, they're still making releases while those vulnerabilities exist. But at the very least, we're not going to allow the development team to introduce new vulnerabilities. So in this case, the set of vulnerabilities that are critical and high should be monotonically decreasing over time, right? You can get rid of vulnerabilities, but you can't introduce new ones to the application. And again, for other applications, that may be the most appropriate. And that's, that type of compromise and negotiation is something that we've found to be very critical for app security teams that need to have a voice or that want to have a voice influencing development security policy, but where organizations have a drive to push out new builds and so on and so forth. Again, you may not be able to get them to agree no criticals, but at least we can all agree that a new build shouldn't introduce new critical or high vulnerabilities. So you can set up these different policies, and again, you may have different policies for different applications. Once we've got the decision configured, we need to configure the reporting. And how do we want to bundle up these vulnerabilities and ship them over to the development teams? As Kyle talked about, ThreadFix gives you the ability to connect to a number of different defect tracking or application lifecycle management systems. We also give you the ability to template and customize what you want those vulnerability reports to look like, as well as to go in and set up defaults. What we found over the course of working with a number of different dev teams, every development team has their defect tracker, their Jira instance, their HPALM instance configured to work with that environment. So we read that metadata and give you the ability to set up templates for reporting. The goal here is we want to communicate these vulnerabilities to the developers in the way that's going to have the least friction. We want to make them as consumable for the development teams as possible to make it easier for them to take action. And we can say, how do we want to make defects, right? At what threshold do we want to start creating defects? If you run a scan, you may not want to automatically create defects with info low or maybe even medium level vulnerabilities, right? Those maybe, again, have, not enough confidence in the results, or it may just be noise that isn't going to be addressed. And so you can say, I only want to report medium vulnerabilities and above, or high and critical vulnerabilities, whatever makes sense for that particular application. And you can also look at how you want to bundle those vulnerability results. Do we want to do that by vulnerability type? Do we want to do it by severity? Or do we want to do it by both? So we want to provide flexibility for how you can report these vulnerabilities to the development team. So again, it's going to make sense. They're going to be the most consumable by that development team. So let's look at testing in action. So from our Jenkins plugin, we detect that there's a new build, and we're going to kick off some testing activities. So within ThreadFix knows there are, we're in the middle of a period of testing, and we see that checkmarks is running a differential scan. So checkmarks is going to go off, do what it's going to do, and when it's ready, it's going to report back to ThreadFix the results of that most recent checkmarks, in this case, differential scan. What we're also doing is using ThreadFix's scan agent to drive an OWASP ZAP scan of the application. And so the ZAP scan is going to run. Similarly, it's going to report back to ThreadFix. ThreadFix is going to report back to Jenkins and say, I know the policy that you wanted to run, and for whatever reason, right, you had a new critical or a new high or whatever that might be, this particular testing run failed, therefore this build is going to fail. And in doing that, again, we've set up, in this case, fairly permissive criteria of what we're going to allow. The new build introduced vulnerabilities, and so somewhere in the combination of the static security testing with checkmark, the dynamic security testing with ZAP, the security state of the system had changed in a way that was out of line with the policy, so we're going to fail the build. Again, with a different testing policy in a situation where maybe some low-level vulnerabilities were introduced but nothing that met the criteria, which is hopefully more frequently the case, the test build is going to pass and it'll move on to the next plugin in the Jenkins pipeline. But from the result of this testing, we're going to grab the vulnerabilities, package them up according to the policy, medium and above, high and above, only criticals, whatever you want. We're going to package them up by type, by severity, by both, and we're going to report those into the defect tracking system. And so those will be in the defect tracking system, but also linked to ThreadFix. So from ThreadFix, you can watch the development team's progress in addressing these issues. as we see these also here exist in this JIRA implementation. Again, feeding these newly identified vulnerabilities into the systems that the development teams are already using. One side note here, as you onboard applications to ThreadFix, there's a process where you go through. Let's run, for all the tools that we're going to run, let's run them, pull out any false positives, potentially change the rule set that we're going to use in order to avoid false positives in the future. So there's a little bit of a curation process that needs to go on during this onboarding. But the value in doing that is once you have that curation process set, you should be able to run incremental tests and be confident that the results you're seeing are hopefully much less likely to be false positives and are going to be targeted at the rules that you really want to run for this particular application. So that is the big push that we've been working on in the 2.5 development series. There's a number of other user interface updates, performance upgrades, and then so on and so forth. But from a new capabilities standpoint, those are really the major new features that have been introduced. And again, we'll have release notes and we can talk current ThreadFix users through all of the new things that are in there. But also to talk a little bit about some of the things that are coming soon. One thing we're doing is we're rolling out support for more static and dynamic tools. And so, for those of you familiar with ThreadFix, we have the ability right now to drive a number of dynamic tools, the desktop-based dynamic tools using our scan agent technology. We also have the ability to connect to a number of external systems. We've talked about check marks where you would have a server inside of your organization. Other examples would be software as a service vendors such as White Hat or CA. And so what we're going to be doing over time is giving you the ability to request and drive scanning activity coordinated and orchestrated by ThreadFix to support additional vendors on the static and the dynamic side. In addition, as we're working with organizations and as they roll out this type of testing using the ThreadFix 2.5 platform, we've identified a number of ways that we can make this even easier to allow for even better centralized control over the testing policies and the orchestration that for default cases will make it even easier for development teams to take advantage of this capability. And so what we want to do is keep the security folks to the degree possible focused on working in ThreadFix, and we want to make it very easy for development teams just to say, I'm running a PCI application that is considered to be of high criticality. I want to run the PCI high policy, and on the security side, that means X, Y, Z activities are going to be run according to a policy and so on and so forth. And so what you'll see through the evolution of the 2.5 series is an increasing focus on how do we take these application security testing tools and make them even easier for development teams to take advantage of, and finding that split between what security teams are doing, what app security teams are doing, and what development teams are doing. And if you have app security resources embedded in development teams, how do you make sure that they're getting the most bang for their buck, or that they're able to focus their activities on the tasks that are really the most critical and high value? And that'll be ready in 4 weeks, Kyle?
That will be ongoing and released in 2.5.1, 2.5.2. The feedback we've been getting from some of the advanced talks that we've been providing to individual clients and prospective clients has been fantastic, and has helped steer where we're going to be heading with this. So yeah, 2.5.1 I'm expecting in about 6 weeks' time. 2.5.2 I would expect about 6 weeks after that, and we'll continue rolling out some of these improvements and enhancements to both these capabilities and the existing capabilities within ThreadFix.
Thank you very much, Kyle. And as you'll notice, I'll tell you the vision, Kyle will tell you the truth, which is probably a good dynamic to have. Okay, excellent. Do we have any questions from folks out there? I see one from along the way. Is Rally supported as a defect tracker? Kyle?
And yeah, I hit up that when we talked about the defect trackers briefly, but yeah, Rally is currently in development and will be available, I anticipate, within the next 6 weeks. But by the 2.5.1 release, Rally integration should be fully supported within ThreadFix as a defect tracker like all the others that we support.
Excellent. Next question. what testing platforms are supported. Right now, if we're talking specifically about the ability to orchestrate scans, on the static side, that is currently checkmarks, with others planned here shortly. On the dynamic side, that is any of the scanners that are supported by the ThreadFix scan agent technology, which is a Zap, Burp, AppScan, WebInspect, AppSpider, Acunetics, and Barker.
Yeah, did you already say that?
I think so. Yeah. In any case, so all of the scan agent technologies, and we're going to be rolling support out across the technologies where we integrate as a remote provider. Where can I find the ThreadFix 2.5 API documentation?
The 2.5 documentation on the API will be available with the 2.5 release, and right now that is not something that we publish online, but is available by request for either clients or prospective clients. You just speak to your either BDR representative at Denim Group for that, or if you are a client, you can simply open a ticket. We'll provide that to you. We are also working on, as a side project, a complete redo of our online documentation for enterprise customers. That is very near rollout. That will probably be coming within a couple of weeks of the 2.5 release, where all customers and active proof of concept participants will have a nice, fresh, shiny documentation site to get any of that information as well.
Excellent. Next question, does ThreadFix perform any auto triaging of or false positives tuning? Can we add our rules for that in the tool? ThreadFix doesn't currently perform any auto triage or false positive tuning. We're looking at potentially using some magic data science to do some of that stuff. As to the question of can you add your rules for that purpose, what you could do in order to do this would be, I would probably do that via the API. If you have certain rules, what you could do is you could request vulnerability results for an application, run through those vulnerabilities, and apply whatever process you have in place, and then use the API to mark those false positives. And Kyle?
Yeah, I was going to say, there's one other way we could expound on that. For certain scanning tools where there's a decent amount of robust triaging support in the tool itself, and I can kind of pick on Fortify as an example. If you go into Fortify Workbench and set up a series of filters that you want as part of your organization's practice for like weeding out false positives or just ignoring certain result types, ThreadFix respects that information when we import the scan results, and we even have, as part of our 2.5.1 release, we will have the ability to even mandate certain filter sets get applied to some of those scanning tools. So, for example, in Fortify, if you require that certain filter sets are part of your upload process, and we detect an FPR is coming in from Fortify that does not have that filter set, we can alert your security team to let you know, hey, your development team is not actually adhering to your policy. So there'll be some additional capabilities there around what we allow for default views and default filtering based on company policies, but we usually pull those cues out of the scanning tool itself as opposed to being something that can be expounded upon in ThreadFix UI.
Excellent. Can we expand or elaborate a bit more on the curation process to avoid false positives being automatically ticketed in a defect tracker? No, great question. And so what kind of the process looks like you going through, again, let's say we're running a scan with check marks or we're running a scan with Zap, we would go through and run a scan with check marks, pull out the false positives, and potentially change the rule sets for that application in checkmarks, the way that it is being scanned in checkmarks. We would tighten that rule set to avoid the rules that we're firing and causing the unwanted defects. Similarly, with the Zap scan in this case, you could go in, clear out the false positives, and change the rule sets that Zap is going to use in order to do its scanning. And you can save that configuration in ThreadFix so that is what gets used to run every time. I wish, again, we get questions about the false positive stuff all the time, and that is, to a certain degree, the scourge of the industry. And so what we're trying to do is make it again, down the road, I think there's some interesting things that could be done to auto-curate or to use historical data to apply. Right now what we're trying to do is make it such that once you've configured a rule set, or if you have a default that rule set or other technology rule set, you can take advantage of that within ThreadFix, so that that's what is used to run every time. Will it be possible to send notifications via email or direct integration with Slack once tests are completed? We able to orchestrate OAuth dependency check and node security project? Great questions. So ThreadFix already has the ability to send notifications via email when new defects are created, or when applications fall out of certain states. For example, it's got we find new critical vulnerabilities, or critical vulnerability, a high vulnerability gets to be over 30 days old or something like that. And so that's something where we can send along, seeing this, we can send along some information about that. And we have some examples of orchestrating ThreadFix and communicating with the Slack API, that's something where we'll find a place in the show notes where we can provide links to that. I've been giving a talk looking at some further research that we've been doing, looking at application attack surface, and just so there's some code examples out there in GitHub that show this type of integration. So we'll find a way to post that with the slides in the video once that is available. Looking at, will we be able to orchestrate OAuth dependency check and node security project? That is a great question. That's something that should be possible. That is not something that we do right now. What we will need, the way that we would probably do that is we would look at adding scan agent support for dependency check and or node security project. The only trick with that is looking at the risk of feeding arbitrary workloads to something running dependency check or node security project. But that's something that we'll certainly look at as an enhancement.
Well, and I can actually speak to that a little bit more. I can tell you that this summer, I don't have an exact date on it yet, but we are collaborating with some of the primary contributors for OAuth dependency check to integrate a remote provider within ThreadFix, which is to say API integration with dependency check within ThreadFix, so that from the ThreadFix UI, you can import dependency check results. If their API, and again, even if it doesn't, we might be able to work out with those dependency check contributors a way to expand their capabilities at the same time. But if their API allows us to make those kinds of requests on orchestration with that remote provider integration, we will go ahead and build that in with them at the same time. So that one's in the running, but we are actually working with the developers of dependency check to kind of expand those capabilities. For a node security project, the NSP, we are also building a remote provider integration for that. There's been some very recent interest in that lately, and so in the next, that one I would also characterize as probably the next 6 weeks or so. The interesting thing about that, and even the next question, which is Fortify SSC API integration, all of those are targeted for our remote provider integrations, which we are now exercising a capability that ThreadFix has had for a long time, but we've just not really utilized it ourselves very much, which is the ability to write a plugin that you drop into your ThreadFix deployment, and then it shows up as an API integration in the UI alongside all the others that ThreadFix ships with. We'll be building a Fortify, actually we've already built most of the Fortify SSC API plugin for ThreadFix, which will drop probably a couple of weeks after 2.5, but it's mostly developed. We're just putting it through the final phases, and since it does not require a new ThreadFix build to put a plugin in it, we'll provide that to our customers and any POCs that want to try the Fortify SSC remote provider integration. Similarly, we'll be building the NSP and the dependency check remote providers as plugins. So those will be things that as they are ready for market, they can get released truly out of cycle with a ThreadFix primary feature release branch. We can just provide that plugin for you guys. And so SSC will be coming first. NSP will probably be the next one out of that list, and then finally dependency check later this summer will all be API integrations that ThreadFix will be able to offer. And where possible, we were going to try and enable that orchestration capability, or at least where it makes sense, so that the CI stuff that we've been seeing in this presentation can be further exercised with additional tools.
And Kyle, when you say dependency check remote provider support, do you mean dependency track
Yes,
the server side,
yes,
manager for results, the dependency check being a desktop-based or a workstation-based tool. Okay.
Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, dependency track. But yes, with the intention of being able to interact with that tool via the UI.
Excellent. Can the API mark as false positive? I am pretty sure that it can.
Yes.
It should be able to do that. And again, we'll look for posting a link to where you can find that in the documentation. Next question, can ThreadFix automatically assign a severity-based deadline to a finding, which then gets pushed to the associated defects? ThreadFix can do parts of that. You can set up alerts in ThreadFix. But it's relatively coarse-grained, but where you could say, hey, for critical vulnerabilities, they need to be addressed in X amount of time. I don't believe through that mechanism you can push that to the associated defect, but with the defect templates that we talked about a little bit before, or the defect defaults, we should be able to, that should be a default that you can set. What I don't know is if you can change that due date or that deadline based on the, if you can say if this severity, then this deadline. That's something that we'll need to take a look at, and again, get some notes pushed out there for y'all. Does ThreadFix allow us to customize rules and severities just in case we need to add and modify the rules according to our own internal or HIPAA standards? And so what you can control, so for a given scanner, if you're talking about rules, you can, again, you can configure the rules for the scanning tool in whatever way that you want, and ThreadFix then works to accept and ingest those results. And a great example is what Kyle talked about before. If you're using Fortify and have a different rule set, and then maybe have some filters in your FPR, again, when you upload that FPR, we should be able to take those filters, take the results, and flow them into ThreadFix without an issue. And so if you're talking about, customizing the rules that run for the scanners, ThreadFix should be able to just accept that stuff. When you talk about customizing severities, we do have some capabilities to map the, like for a given scanning technology to say, hey, this scanner reports everything as a high, I want to bump that down to a medium because I think that scanner is alarmist. And so we do have the ability in the administration customization console for different scanners to give you the ability to adjust the mapping between different scanning technologies, severities, and the ultimate severity that it lands in within ThreadFix.
And additionally, on top, or in addition to what Dan said in regards to customizing that, you can also choose to suppress severities from certain scanners of a particular severity type. So you just say the info level information that comes in from checkmarks is just noisy, I don't want it. You can suppress that automatically. You can also manually map per scanner and vulnerability type, any other customization. So if anything coming in from checkmarks that is, say, a critical or a high, you want to make it critical, you can make that designation. And finally, you can reset within ThreadFix what any of those severities labels are so that it gets reported as your organization. Like if you call critical a Sev1, for instance, you can rename that through the UI. It'll get reflected appropriately in all the different reporting as well as the defects that we create. So there's a lot of different ways to customize that within the tool.
Next question, since ThreadFix is being integrated within CI/CD to make build-fail decisions, can the product import vulnerability data from the remote provider on demand, or does it still rely on the scheduler? We'll have to check on the implementation of that. I think it
yes. So for the remote providers that we're building out orchestration capabilities through, that'll be just a natural part of the orchestration because the request for the scan will imply, the request for the scan to execute will imply the request for the scan data once it is completed. So that will happen automatically. For the request to import scan results from remote providers, that will be an API enablement piece where if you want to either expand the plugin for Jenkins that we'll be providing or write your own for your own CI environment such as Bamboo or whatever, you can make requests of the API to pull in scan data that you have already configured within ThreadFix between the remote provider and your ThreadFix app. So both of those will be possible.
Excellent. These are all great questions. Let's see. I think does anybody have any additional questions? Okay, our pen test providers provide us with recommended remediation measures. Is it possible to automatically parse and push those suggestions to the defects, or do we have to add those manually? Kyle, tell me if I'm lying. Kyle will tell you if I'm lying. As part of the 2.5 development branch, we have, so for a long time, ThreadFix has given you the ability to import results in a format we call SSVL, or the Simple Software Vulnerability Language. And that lets you basically upload an XML document into ThreadFix, and it's a great way for importing manual results. And we also have some tooling around that will take CSV or Excel files and turn those into XML documents. One of the other things that is coming up in the 2.5 development branch, and I told Kyle this wasn't cool enough to talk about on the webinar, and apparently I was wrong because you asked a question about it. But one of the other big changes is we're making the SSVL format and that import-export capability much more robust, and as part of that, I would expect that that would give you the ability to import those custom remediation recommendations into ThreadFix the way we do from a number of the different scanning technologies.
So nothing you said is a lie. In 2.5.1, we will have a much more robust SSVL support that will enable not only additional information about the vulnerability itself to be passed in, essentially putting it in feature parity with what the scan results are providing, but also to allow you to identify point of origin, so multiple sources of the SSVL data won't step on each other's toes, essentially. ThreadFix won't think that that is coming from the same source. So that all of that will be a capability. The other, is it possible automatically parsing? Oh, the other thing that you can do with remediation recommendations within ThreadFix today, I mean, this has been a capability for a little while now, is for particular vulnerability types. If there is stock organizational specific remediation recommendations for particular vulnerability, like anytime you get a cross-site scripting, please see this internal document on how to approach the remediation of cross-site scripting, for instance. You can configure that stock text in ThreadFix so that anytime a defect gets created from a vulnerability of that type, it will automatically get injected into the description of the vulnerability defect you've put into JIRA or put into Bugzilla or whatever. So you can ensure that if there's an approved approach to handling certain types of vulnerabilities, that always finds its way to the developer whenever you create that issue. So there's a couple of different ways that could be handled.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, using the velocity, we use the velocity templating system to allow you to customize the text, and that those remediation recommendations, if they're stored in ThreadFix, it would be a field that you could include in that test. Next question, is there Splunk integration? That is something that we have talked about, and if you wouldn't mind submitting, we would love to know more about how organizations specifically want to use Splunk and ThreadFix together. You know, ThreadFix obviously has its event logging. You know, that's not exactly a good match for that. Inside of Jenkins, as those Jenkins runs go, those have, that has logging as well. If you have some specifics about the type of information that you would want from ThreadFix and how you would like for that to be made available to Splunk, that would be really helpful. Again, we've talked, kind of at a high level with some organizations about the desire for Splunk integration, especially now as organizations are starting to use Splunk to monitor CI/CD pipeline activities to ingest that data. Certainly we have the ability to, log out, basic messages that say this particular run found, 2 new criticals, 5 new highs, and 3 mediums got closed or whatever. It's really just a matter of figuring out exactly like what format does that need to be in and where does that need to show up so that it can be, so that it's useful to a given Splunk instance. So please feel free to reach out via the, on the ThreadFix site, there's a contact form. That would be great to know more about the specific use case that you're looking for the Splunk integration. All right, I think we have, let's see, are there any more questions out there? Appreciate folks sticking with us. We're back at the top of the hour here. I'm certainly happy to sit here with Kyle answering questions all day long, but other folks may have things that they want to do or they may be out of questions. All right. I think we're good on questions, or we've got all the questions that are coming in. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. You know, hopefully it came across, but we're really excited about the things that we're doing with ThreadFix 2.5. You know, and as I said, like, this is in many ways a distillation of what we've seen from a lot of you know, from a lot of really cool things that people have been doing for their application security programs using ThreadFix. You know, again, 2.5 the bits should be available here on
Monday. But yeah, for clients, we'll be rolling these things out, the builds out for the clients that are interested. I will be having the website updated early next week, probably Monday, maybe Tuesday, for the trial downloads, so that anybody who wants to play with the stuff that we've been talking about can go and grab a copy of it off of our website at www.threadfix.it. Yeah, expect that coming soon.
Well, great. Well, thanks to everybody for coming out today. Really appreciate it. And please feel free to reach out and ask any questions that you may continue to have. And we'll get the video recording up online here usually in the next day or so. Again, thanks everybody for coming out, and talk to you soon.